tonight we're going to have a special treat. Some time ago, I picked up a book, Ham Radio DX. Tell you, from this is an unsolicited endorsement, but I think anybody who likes DX ought to buy this book.
Well, thank you for having me, and you earned your $100 for the non-paid endorsement. Thank you. I'm totally kidding. So, my name is Lucas W6AER, and since I don't know anybody really that well here, just a real quick overview so you know who I am. So currently 310 entities, 8-band DXCC, 9-band WAS, which doesn't sound crazy, but I am on a very small lot. We were joking about that earlier, and I'm not kidding. It's 48 feet across and maybe about twice the length in the back. So I literally have more antennas than trees, as I joked about it in the book. And that's not a joke. So basically, those who don't know where I am, I'm just south of San Francisco in Pacifica, which is um, about 10, 15 minutes from San Francisco. And no, I did not feel the earthquake today. Just everybody's asking me all day. So I got the alert, but didn't feel it. I'm active on all HF bands, including 60 meters. In fact, that's kind of where I'm at a lot, is 160 and 60 lately. I work all modes, not just FT8, like some people. I work satellites, VHF, UHF, up to 10 gigahertz, and again from a tiny lot, so it's kind of wild sometimes. And my wife is a saint for putting up with my antennas. And I also do some low frequency activity, which is a little bit nutty. Maybe I can talk about that later if anybody's interested. And that's kind of an experimental thing I do, but I have several buckets loaded up with coils of wire, hooked it up to my 160 meter antenna, and it's been fun. But the best DX I have so far is Texas, so that's not saying much. It's really hard to work out low frequency on 1 watt, so it's interesting though, and I enjoy HF satellite work. Fascinated by SDRs and especially rare digital modes that not everybody's on. A little bit about me. If you notice I sound funny, that's because I was born in Europe. And science background and a teaching background. And I work in IT. That's pretty much what I've been doing since college. And as I mentioned, I also have a side job, so it makes it a little hard to DX, but I always find time. And photography is one of my hobbies, which really came in handy when I was doing the book, because almost all the photos I took, and there's over 100 photos in the book, so that helped a lot. And we'll travel, hopefully, when I retire, which I'm looking at about 4 more years, I'm hoping. Maybe I'll be activating some places. I'll be already planning a few things. Okay, real quick. So why did I tackle this? And I'll have some sections I want to go over from the book. But basically, when I started DXing, this is what I wanted to read, and I couldn't find it. And this was I was really struggling. So there wasn't really much out there for me to read. I had to search the internet, a lot of outdated things. I talked to so-called experts who gave me some pretty bad advice. I learned that quickly, but I didn't know any better. And I found there is some information out there that was either sketchy or outdated. So a lot of trial and error. So I kind of documented that in the book. And again, I like to tell people there is more than one way of doing things. What I wrote about in the book is just one way, or a couple of ways maybe, that I did and worked for me. But there is definitely a lot of wrong ways of doing things, and I can talk about that too because I've done them too. So let's see here. So this was a book that took me actually quite a long time to write. When I set out to write it, I figured, oh, I'll start it, knock it out in 6 months. I was dead wrong. It took more like a little over 2 years, really. But essentially, I started the idea about 8 or 10 years ago, and really about 2 years of on and off writing. And as I started writing it, I figured, oh, it'd be like 100 pages. I hope I can get to 100 pages. And then I got to 200. Then I said, oh boy, this is going to be a little big. And then I got to close to 400. Then I said, okay, time to change the format. So size became much bigger so that I can fit less pages in there and the printing cost wouldn't be ridiculously expensive. So, and it ended up being 290 pages on an 8 by 10 book, so it's pretty hefty. Um, and then I started resizing the photos. I basically was really hesitant to cut anything out, and that's what I ended up with. Now the sales did they vary, but it did surprisingly well. I don't know if you can see it here. This is about a month after it was released. Actually, it was number 6 in radio communications and radio operating, which kind of blew me away considering I'm up against people like Gordo and the ARRL. And those books are obviously, I mean, yeah, there's just no way I'm gonna beat those guys in sales. Not to mention all the licensing books. So that surprised me. But it's, it costs a little bit of money to put it out there. And audiobook, I'm still trying to break even because, I have to pay somebody to do the voiceover. Nobody wants to listen to me for 15 and a half hours. And so sales are good, but couple more, a few more sales, and I think I break even on that audiobook too. Okay. So here's what I covered. So my goal was to have A through Z guide. Um, and I think for the most part, I nailed it. There were a couple of things I wish I had included in there, and maybe I'll do a second edition in a couple of years. And essentially for beginners, antennas, balance, hardware, software. I did a lot of focusing on software. Station setup, including ergonomics and taking noise into consideration, things like that, that a lot of people don't think about. Grounding, I put an asterisk there because, full disclosure, I don't ground. So I know everybody just fell off their chair, but I've been operating for over a decade and I'm on the second floor and works just fine. So I ground things, but not earth ground. So to be specific. So I did talk about it though. It's a good idea, but if you can't, you can't. Working split, I covered that in detail, all 3 modes. So I have a whole chapter dedicated to CW phone and digital. Digital is obviously the largest chapter by far. How to QSL and designing QSL cards and so on, including 6 meters. And then, of course, those who are more seasoned, I didn't want to put people to sleep, so I talked about RFI and EMI, which is one of the things I'll talk about that more. In fact, one of the sections I want to cover relates to that. Pile-up techniques, things that work for me, things that don't, digital modes awards, and I cover quite a bit about propagation. And the most important section, I always joke about this, but not really, is how not to be a lid. And there is yeah, I think you're all DXers. I think you know what I'm talking about. So there were some things I wrote about that I had to revise, some controversies when I had my beta readers read it, and some things I did. There were some products that I maybe didn't recommend. There were some things that I didn't want to basically call out any products or anything by name. If I didn't like it, I just kind of glanced over it or didn't really mention it. And but it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. Maybe it's just something I haven't used or etc. But I did try and keep a positive tone. And like I say here, I did fail at first because when I did the initial beta, I I guess it was part of my therapy, I think, dealing with lids on the air. So I wrote quite a bit about that, and I kind of toned it down, narrowed it down to a smaller section. So it's a little more positive flow. There's a little bit about that in there on what not to do. I've screen captured some interesting behavior on FTA. Those who've seen the book, and especially on 160 meters, you see some crazy things at night. I'm always on 160 at night, so I actually had so much captured that I had to pick and choose which images I'm going to use in the book. So maybe one day I'll release online a little bonus thing with all the stuff I didn't use in the book. So some of it is not. Um, there are some things that are R-rated, so I didn't want to put them in the book. Let's leave it at that. Okay, so when I was deciding what to write, basically I was trying to do something that has the information that's valuable, but it's not too expensive. And I kind of compared what's out there. There were things that were, decent, but they were expensive or a little hard to read. So that's kind of where I was aiming for. Hopefully, I made it to kind of where I was aiming. I really wanted to make it affordable for people. I'm literally making a couple of bucks a copy, and I'm not even joking. So it's not. I'm not getting rich. Trust me. I'm not buying an extra flex radio from the profits. I can tell you that. Maybe a couple of QSL cards, but essentially, that was my goal. That was actually one of the hardest things is to figure out that sweet spot. How did I come up with what to write about? So I was an Elmer. I still kind of am at the San Francisco Radio Club, and so I was working with new members, DXers, helping them out, getting started. A lot of younger, some high schoolers who were interested in ham radio, so helped them out. I also run a blog at w6ar.com, and I get pretty decent traffic there, and I get a lot of questions actually from there, and many of the same questions. I'd say every 3 or 4 months I see some of the same exact questions. So I made note, and they made the book because I said, well, I'm just gonna write it down and put it in the book and see what happens. I'm also following email discussions like the NCDXC, NCCC, and there's regular discussions about things that people need help with. So I made notes. That made the book. Slack channels. I don't know if people are familiar with Slack. It's kind of like a chat system that it's used in IT quite a bit. There are some ham radio, amateur radio groups on chat or on Slack chat, and I monitor those. User online forums and Facebook groups. And Deja Vu, like I say, pretty much the same reoccurring questions. So I kept really good notes over a couple of years, and that's what made it. My observation is some people really don't read, even if somebody comes back with an explanation. So that obviously wasn't my target audience, but I figured out that one of the reasons is because some of the explanations were a little too complicated, I guess is the word, for people to digest, especially if they're just starting out. So I have some background in education, so one of the things I like to think I do well is simplify complex things into bite-sized pieces for people to be able to understand. So that came in handy. All right, so what's next? And so one of the things I'm thinking about is maybe doing a second edition at some point, like 4 or 5. I guess when I retire, because it takes a lot of time. Maybe a second edition. But right now, I'm actually working on finishing something that I started a little while ago. And I kind of announced this about a year ago, and I'm hoping Sorry, that was a little loud. I was hoping to have this released by now, but life got in the way. And this is the book that I started writing actually before I started the DX book. This was the book I was going to write originally. And I do a lot of satellite work. I also do some ham TV. I kind of do a little bit of everything. I guess it's ADD. I don't know. But this will be coming out hopefully shortly. It's something that is very similarly written to how the DX book is, but this I think is more useful also for people who got their technician license because they can get on satellites. But here's the thing, a lot of people don't realize this. You can DX on satellites. I have about 60 countries confirmed on satellite. So now getting to 100 is, uh, especially right now, is kind of mission impossible from California at least. And you guys are on the West Coast mostly too, so I think you probably know how hard it is to hit certain things because, Earth is round and so on. Essentially, this will be coming out, hopefully, I'm hoping in the next 6 months or so. I had to make adjustments because one of the satellites, the IO 117, actually died. And had a whole chapter written on that satellite. And of course, the minute I finished that chapter, the satellite went SK. So I had to go back and revise some things. But if there's something that you see that I'm missing, that you like to, those who work satellites, just shoot me a line. Let me know. Um, Feedback is good, and I'll try and include it. But yeah, you can definitely work DX, and even if you just work the International Space Station, you can very easily work 5 or 6 entities, and you'd be surprised what these satellites can cover. Let's see. And one thing I ask your help with, if you read the book and if you have any interest in it, reviews are nice, and what it does, it helps with rankings, gets those who are possibly interested in ham radio or DXing, it gets this book recommended to them. Now, this book is actually carried at DX Engineering as well, and that's my preferred vendor. Reason being, if you are a DXer, you know why, because they sponsor a lot of DX expeditions. So I give them my full support, and I always tell people, if you're gonna buy the book, please buy it from DX Engineering, unless you, for some reason, you don't want to. They really are great guys. I talked to them when I was at Visalia one year when the book came out, and a month or two later, I was sending them blocks of 30 for their two warehouses, and they refilled it a few times now. So they're selling them. And I figure since they sponsor all these D expeditions, I want to help them out too. So I always tell people go there first. There's also an audiobook version for those who want it. And interestingly enough, that was not planned. When I released this book, I had it out on in a paperback and Kindle, and they sell about equal. And then a couple of people asked me if I have a hardcover. So I went and created a hardcover edition that did well. And then I kept getting emails, like five or six, asking me if there's an audiobook. So I got intrigued and I said, well, this book has a lot of pictures. How you gonna, you want us to describe the photos, or how does that work? So the audiobook actually has a PDF insert that people can download if they want to reference the pictures and a brief description. And to my surprise, that actually sold pretty well. Um, and when I asked somebody why they wanted an audiobook, and I kind of had a good laugh, they said, I don't like to read. So I said, okay, well, then audiobook is for you. So apparently there's a lot of people who don't like to read. They just like to listen to things. So, hey, God bless them. So not as an audiobook. So that's something, like I said, I haven't quite broken even on, because I had to pay somebody to do the voiceover. He was a fellow ham, actually. So he understood the terminology and didn't say weird things with all of our unique acronyms that we have in the DX world. So that worked out well. So, anyways, yeah, well, this is where I can take questions, comments, complaints. If you need to reach me, simple, Lucas at w6ar.com. Website, Vitamin DX is the publishing company. Yes, I do have a YouTube channel. That's at Maximum RF, and that is a ham radio channel. And I'm hoping to get that a lot more active. I get about maybe a video every 2 months comes out. Like I just did a Pacificon walkthrough, Pacificon Ham Convention. I do some product things or some tips and whatever comes to mind. There's a couple that are being edited right now. I actually just did a 4 hour interview with a pretty well-known ham and his whole life story. I'm not gonna say who yet, but I know you know him. And I'm kind of working with him on finalizing that. So that's going to be coming out in 4 parts, because nobody's going to sit through 4 hours straight. But it's very comprehensive. So that's coming out. It's just, I work full time. I run a side business. I want to have a life outside of radio. So it's a little hard to write books and run a YouTube channel and everything else. I need to retire. That's the key. Just need to retire.